I'm Jerry Gordon, a senior editor at the New English Review. I'm here with our frequent colleague and discussant, former U.S. Army Brigadier General, now retired, John Adams. And John, before we get into stuff, there's really some less than positive developments in what is now the 7-month plus. This is the 243rd day. I think the casualties amongst IDF troops there risen to about 286, I guess, at last recording, but that excludes folks who were really clobbered during the invasion by Hamas itself. And of course, hundreds, if not thousands, of casualties. But the first question we have to deal with is what the U.S. administration is doing. It seems to have gone back and forth with support for Israel, and it questions essentially whether they really understand the importance of a sovereign nation like Israel defending itself and conducting activities against its nemesis, meaning Hamas in this case. So my first question to you is, why did Biden backtrack from his criticism of the IDF for its Rafah incursion?
I think the most important reason that he backtracked was he's trying, and I think unsuccessfully trying, but he is trying to walk a very fine line between the left of the Democratic Party and his own, and I think most Americans' support for Israel. The left of the Democratic Party is not a friend of Israel, and they will push for whatever will hamper Israel in its war against Hamas, and whatever will hamper and hobble the IDF. And they have been successful in hobbling the IDF. And I think President Biden realizes that he's taken a largely obstructionist approach to Israel's war goals, and that he's actually provided help for Hamas. And now he's trying to, again, walk a very fine line between being solicitous of the left of his own Democratic Party for electoral purposes, and the traditional backing of Israel by the United States people, the national security wing of his own party, the Democratic Party, and Republicans who are hammering him for his anti-Israel stances. So I think he's trying to go light where he can. And the other part is just facts. Israel has done everything that has been asked to do. It was asked by the U.S., by President Biden and his administration, to do everything possible to minimize civilian casualties in Rafah and in Gaza. They've done everything they can do. They were asked to come up with a plan. And, a plan is always going to be subject to the evaluation of the evaluator. But they told the United States, Israel told the United States, we're going to try to evacuate the area of civilians so that they will not be exposed to this attack. And almost 1 million Palestinians have left the Rafah area because the IDF has been successful in getting them to go to other parts of Gaza. The United States asked Israel to facilitate the provision of humanitarian supplies, and they've done everything they can do, but they can't stop the weather from destroying the pier that we so expensively constructed. The weather destroyed it, and it's now under expensive repairs in an Israeli port. And hopefully that will work. But I mean, when's the next storm? Who knows? It's bad weather. And then the other thing that's happened is the supplies that do go ashore and through the crossing points are looted by Hamas. So what's Israel supposed to do? They're providing access to the crossing ports. They only just last week took over the crossing point with the Israel or with the Egyptian border, and that could potentially open that up. But the other crossing points were under the ostensible control of Israel, but Hamas is still present, and when the trucks go in, the Hamas terrorists assault the trucks and take the supplies for their own purposes. So, bottom line is, I think the facts on the ground have created a situation where Biden has to lighten up on it a little bit. He's not going to stop criticizing the IDF. He's not going to stop criticizing Israel, but there's only so far he can go based with the facts on the ground.
Two comments. The rising star in the Democratic Party is a rather unusual gentleman. He towers over every other member of Congress. His name is John Fetterman, senator from Pennsylvania. Just yesterday, he was awarded the highest honor by Yeshiva University for essentially his courageous stands, not only in support of Israel's war against Hamas, but also against anti-Semitism, whether it's here in the United States, but especially on these radical college campus encampments. So there is the suspicion that John Fetterman might be a possible candidate for higher office, essentially, if there was an open convention in August in Chicago with the Democrats. We'll see if that ever eventuates. The other comment I have is that it's very interesting. Israel's most ancient enemies in the US government has been the State Department. And there've been a flurry of resignations all over the question of inadequate humanitarian aid in this conflict. And of course, they're saying that Gaza is teetering on the brink of a famine. How cynical, because real famine has broken out in Sudan. 6.5 million people have scattered to the surrounding 5 countries. A real jihad, I repeat that, is being waged in Darfur at this point in time. And the combatants, on the one hand, with the Sudanese armed forces, are supported by Egypt and Iran. And in the case of the Arab militias, the Rapid Support Force, they're supported by the UAE and Russia. So this is madness. The accusations about a famine committed because of lack of Israeli humanitarian support is bogus.
Well, I don't think there's still people playing on the beach in Gaza. They're not IDF soldiers.
Correct.
They're still hospitals working in Gaza. But to be honest, not at the highest capacity. I don't think they're doing any liver transplants there. But I think that to say that Gaza is under a world-class famine is just not, it's not honest.
Correct. Getting back to the seizure of the Philadelphia corridor, this is the umpteenth time, by the way, that Israel has done that since these wars began. But what's interesting is the discovery of significant number of tunnels that go underneath the frontier into Egypt, some as large as to capable of receiving trucks running back and forth. And this is an embarrassment to Egypt, as supposed to be a honest partner, so to speak, in negotiations with Hamas on the release of the hostages, among other things in this regard. So cynicism rises to a high level in terms of the activities there, as it does here in the West. Look what you have in the way of countries recognizing a Palestinian state. You've got Norway, Ireland, Spain, and now Slovenia. What Slovenia has in the way of a watching brief in Israel will fill a thimble at best. So, John, what I'd like to address is comments coming out of U.S. intelligence sources suggest that the IDF has decimated less than 30% of Hamas fighting battalions and less than 30% of the Gaza tunnels. How is Israel?
I think the first question I would have hearing that the IDF is alleged to have only destroyed 30% of the Hamas fighting force and 30% of the tunnels is, where does that information come from? My understanding is that the filter for information that the U.S. intelligence community, whether it be DIA, CIA, NSA, whatever, comes through the IDF. So unless their information is based on a leak from the IDF, I wouldn't know how the U.S. could make that kind of determination. And it may be that they've got somebody inside the IDF who's spreading this allegation. But let's imagine that. But I think the IDF, what they appear to be doing is providing as much as they can within operational security restrictions about how the fight's going. And as I understand it, it's going pretty well. And they've got 2 or 3, 2+ battalions of Hamas fighters yet to destroy. There appears to be some progress ongoing in Rafah right now. Israeli tanks are in the middle of Rafah. They've cleared out most of the communities to the west of Rafah, between the city and the Mediterranean Sea. And honestly, my friends in the IDF are telling me that the battle is terrible because it's killing IDF soldiers, but it's going well. And they are proceeding with their mission of trying to root out Hamas. They're taking it easy because of the concern for civilian casualties, which they should, and they are, but they're accomplishing their mission. And I think this kind of, what I would argue as spurious allegations, that they've only accomplished 30% of fighters and 30% of tunnels destroyed, is designed to put doubt in the minds of people that don't know what's going on, and have no real sense of what this fight's all about. To say, oh, they'll never destroy Hamas. It's a fool's errand. And we've heard that from everybody from the media, which you can expect them not to know much about what's going on. To David Petraeus, who says it's time for Israel to transfer to a counterinsurgency model, like he was real successful in Afghanistan, like he was real successful in Iraq. I know David Petraeus. I respect him as a person. I think he's an honorable man. But I don't think he's the guru of how to fight war. I would never take that as a serious comment. So I think the IDF is doing what it's supposed to do. They're going to get assaulted on all sides, including the denial of their success, and that's not going to go away from a media which hates the IDF and hates Israel. They're trying to stoke or to sow the seeds of doubt in what the IDF's war goals are.
So what tactics and technology is the IDF using to clear out the alleged returning, I may say, Hamas units in Jabaliya in northern Gaza?
Well, 2 things that they're doing is both counterintelligence and signal intelligence. They're interrogating captured Hamas all the time, and they've been doing that for 7 months. They know where Hamas has put weapons. They know where Hamas hideouts are. They know where some of the tunnels are, and they're going to go back to take care of things that aren't already solved. And they're going to find people that their interrogators point them to. The second thing is signal intelligence. And I should mention signal intelligence both from the ground and from the air. They have a prodigious amount of aerial reconnaissance there, both high level and low level. It listens for everything that might be going on. They've also put sensors in Gaza as they overran it. They put sensors in there of all kinds, sensors that listen, sensors that detect movement, sensors that detect the ground, what's going on the ground. Something called MAZINT, measuring intelligence. Not often discussed in public, but the Israelis have pioneered it. So they know where when a vehicle's moving or when people are moving, even in small spaces, they put sensors in there to detect that. So I think they're one of the things that they relied on perhaps too much prior to October 7th was technology. Well, they've got a lot of technology, and they realized the mistakes that they made prior to October 7th. I think they're trying to redress that with a very sound exposition of technology in Gaza as they overrun it. It's unlikely that Gaza will ever be completely free of Israeli technology. They're not going to take it all out, no matter who occupies it. They're going to keep it there. And I think it's helping them as they root out Hamas as it returns.
Well, I noticed that they're also engaged in using aged M113 armored personnel carriers as robotic devices to essentially transmit troops as well as weapons, and also to be used essentially as detonation platforms. So that's more to their credit. So the idea appears to be preparing an operation in southern Lebanon, given 8 months of war and evacuating more than 60,000 Israelis from the country's northern towns. What seems to be the IDF strategy to confront Hezbollah's drone, rocket, missile threats and secure the border with Lebanon and Syria?
First, an ironic fact: when President Biden said he wasn't going to provide Israel with more laser-guided bombs that are large enough to destroy bunkers, that really hampers Israel in the north, where they're trying to destroy Hezbollah installations and have been successful in destroying numbers of Hezbollah installations. So if you're going to hinder, and I think the intent was to send a message to the world that the U.S. is going to try to keep Israel from doing depredations in Gaza, you're sending a message to the world that you're going to stop selling one of the most valuable weapons that Israel has to fight Hezbollah and destroy their installations in southern Lebanon. It's a foolish message. It doesn't help. It doesn't assist the Israelis at all in trying to deal with the other problem that they have, which is this huge number of Hezbollah who are stationed south of the Litani River in Lebanon, only 10 miles away from northern Israel, launching missiles and rockets and sending in the occasional patrol into northern Israel, which is why the tens of thousands of Israelis have evacuated northern Israel. So the plan, and no plan survives the first contact, but the plan is, and I know of this because I have friends in the IDF who've talked with me about it, and I don't think I'm violating their confidence by talking about it on this because it's been reported in the press too. The plan is to drive Hezbollah well north of the Litani River, so well north of the 10-kilometer, 10-mile line, to fulfill the 2006 UN Resolution 7100, which called for the withdrawal of Hamas from the area south of the Litani River. Never been done. Lebanon has actually facilitated Hamas moving in there. The government of Lebanon it's largely controlled by Hamas. So moving them north of the Litani River is the main thing they want to do. But moving further north, I think the Israelis will attack further north. And I don't know whether they're going to make the line. The river happens to be a good line, but I think they'll drive them far north of that. And in a perfect world, just as UN Resolution 7100 calls for, the Lebanese army would occupy the area south of the Litani River. And we'll see. I mean, I think the ability for Israel in a combined arms operation, including air, of course, including sea power, to drive Hamas north of the Litani is, they'll do it. They've been working on them with aerial munitions and ground-based artillery, for example, for the last 7 months. But what they have done so far is really nothing to what they'll do once they make a decision to go into Lebanon. And I think that's going to be based on the progress against Hamas. I think we can expect the same protests from the international community as we've seen in as we've seen in Gaza. As long as the Biden administration is in power, they'll attack Israel for doing it. They'll try to keep them from winning, just like they're doing now, because they don't want Israel to win. They want Israel to negotiate and build a two-state solution kind of a prospect, as opposed to letting Israel defeat their enemy. But that's what Israel will do, and they can do it. They have the ability. They have the combined arms capability. They've exercised this, and they're doing that now. I have friends who have their sons in units along the Lebanon border who are practicing and exercising all the time. So when the Israeli government says it's time to go to Lebanon, it'll be very quick, very hard, and I predict they will be successful unless we, the U.S. or somebody else, gets in their way.
Netanyahu government recently inked a $750 million contract with Elbit Systems for weapons production. What strategic message does that send to the Biden administration about Israel's move to seek domestic production of critical military technology rather than relying on U.S. military aid?
Well, I think the question itself is the answer. They know that, at this point they can't rely on U.S. military aid. We, the United States government, has sent that message, unfortunately, that we're going to use it as a lever that we have to push in order for them to get the military aid. That's not real military aid. That is a leash that the U.S. holds over Israel. So Israel is, beginning, and there's a big debate in Israel. Should Israel develop an independence of its supply chain from the United States? And even if they decide they're going to develop an independent supply chain, that's going to take some time to flesh out, but they're starting. And so contracting with Elbit Systems to begin to produce some of the weapons that they haven't in the past is a great sign. It tells the U.S., hey, we don't want to be messed with. We want to conduct our operations independently if we need to protect our country, because we've seen. I think it's a good message, but it's more of a subtle message than it is, hey, we're really tired of being messed with. They're really saying we're going to take care of ourselves. We realize we can only rely upon ourselves, and we're going to try to build that capability.
So what does the first tranche of $1 billion out of the $14 billion appropriated by Congress for military assistance to Israel contain?
My understanding is that we're going to replenish Iron Dome interceptors. Mm-hmm. We're going to provide other defensive weapons that they've used to defend themselves against rockets and missiles in the last 7 months and before, because they use the Iron Dome frequently, almost on a daily basis, and that's critical for Israel's defensive capabilities. I don't know, but I suspect that there'll also be some provision of some of the ground systems that they've had so much damage to during the operation. I don't expect that there will be a lot of the. In fact, we can expect that they won't provide a lot of the air-delivered munitions that have been successful, and that were at one point discussed as we were going to cut that off because we don't want Israel killing civilians anymore. I suspect that will be delayed a little bit, but that's my understanding.
Even more ominous is the International Atomic Energy Organization reported that Iran has more than 313 pounds of 60% enriched uranium, capable of reaching the 90% level for nuclear weapons processing. What could the US and Israel have in place to forestall this threat?
I'm happy that the helicopter crash that killed the Iranian president is ambiguous at best. Who knows what it was, and I would hesitate to say Israel was behind that. Maybe not, but I think there are a lot of ways that Israel can hurt Iran, and if nothing else, slow it down, create dissension within its senior military and civilian ranks, and I think they will continue to do things like that. If nothing else, just to slow down the IRGC and slow down the government of Iran in its overall movement towards a nuclear capability. I think the other thing that we are not doing and that we should do is to try to destroy the oil traffic between Iran and China. We've not done that. We let Iran get rich off of Chinese purchase of their oil. And I think there are some strategic reasons, which I disagree with the strategy. There are strategic reasons why the U.S. continues to allow that. But of course, Israel would not let that happen if they could. So I'm sure there are back channels in Washington about what and how to do that. And hopefully, as the election gets closer and the debate in Washington gets more intense about what's going on in the Middle East and that region, other opportunities will arise. The most important thing that we could do, and that Israel would, of course, support, would be to encourage internal dissension in Iran. The people themselves are not happy with the regime, and given the opportunity, would rise up against it. And we've not encouraged that. I'm not sure that that's going to continue to be the case. I would hope that we would change our minds and start to try to punish Iran and hurt Iran, as opposed to just letting them be the malign influence they are on the region.
As an aside, Iran's partner in the so-called axis of resistance is North Korea. And several years ago, when I interviewed the NORAD director who was retiring here, and it was 2016, I asked him a specific question as to when would North Korea have the ability to launch a nuclear ballistic missile. And he said, if they can complete miniaturization of the warheads, which some people believe they have done, they will be capable of doing that. The relationship between North Korea and Iran goes back a long way in the context of testing devices, including the construction of the plutonium bomb factory that Israel destroyed in 2007. And therefore, the question really comes down to what the U.S., together with partners in Southeast Asia, are considering doing to forestall that. The Japanese and South Korea in particular have that at the topmost concern. If North Korea has in fact reached that tipping point. Just before the Iran helicopter crash in their Azerbaijani province, of all people, President Biden sent the Middle East envoy, Brett McGurk, who we've heard from before, with aides to meet with Iran's deputy foreign minister in Oman. What was the diplomatic objective of that to achieve versus espousing an active deterrent policy of Iran and its proxies in the region?
Well, I think the long-term goal of the United States is to reset the region and to the U.S. current U.S. policy is to, instead of isolating and hurting Iran, is to make it feel like, well, we're not trying to overthrow the regime. We're trying to recognize the new reality where Iran is part of the region and they have legitimate interests, and that we should somehow facilitate that. I completely disagree with that strategy. I think that the U.S. have tried to do that, certainly under the Biden administration, and certainly under the Obama administration, and to a certain extent under the Bush administration too. I don't hold them blameless. So I think that's a foolish strategy, because it relies on Iran to be anything other than a malign actor. And Iran wants nothing more than destruction of the West. They tell us that. I think we should take them at their word. Do they want to destroy Israel and kill Jews? They tell us that. I think we should take them at their word. They've done exactly what they said they're going to do so far. And the only thing that stopped them is technology. And the fact that we've got some controls in place, good. We should have more, but clearly not enough, because as you said, they're getting close to developing the nuclear capability, despite the sanctions, because we continue to facilitate that. I think McGurk is trying to hold open the lines of communication with the government of Iran. He personally has always been involved in that. He has his own center of power in the national security establishment and in the State Department, but he's not an independent actor. He's doing this with the complete knowledge and blessing of the Secretary of State Blinken, who apparently has bought into the two-state solution. We can castigate that to the end of the world, and I'd be okay with that. But that just represents the notion of having a reset Middle East to understand and reflect reality, where everybody has opportunity to be a player in the region who's a government, including Iran. So I think the strategy is foolish. I think the sooner we just disabuse ourselves of the notion of Iran ever being a productive player in the Middle East, the better off we're all going to be.
But that raises the question of regime change in Iran. And experts like Morty Kadar in Israel and others have suggested that there's enough effort available in different ethnic groups in Iran to begin to facilitate that. The Awaz Sunnis in the southwest, who control most of the oil that Iran produces in its offshore platforms in the Persian Gulf. Then you've got folks that I have on my Facebook page, the Blocks, who really are amazing. They're fighting China because it's Pakistan's ally, and because Pakis want to build a port in the Balak province. So they've been capable of doing that. The Balaks are cheap by jowl with the southeastern Iranian province that is, frankly, teetering on the brink, essentially revolt in that regard. So
they're the same tribe.
Exactly. And tribes talk to each other. They convene conferences. The same thing is true in other regions of Iran. The Azeris, they speak the same language as their secular counterparts in Azerbaijan next door. And of course, the Azerbaijanis have a friend in Israel in that regard. So it's amazing to me how the Biden administration persists in the delusions that came with it in the famous JCOP exercise, which, by the way, terminates next year, 2025, as I recall. And all it has done is extenuate essentially Iran's capability as an enemy of the world at this point. I'm not talking about just Israel and Jews globally. I'm talking about the world. They don't want it. So let me turn to a different matter, which is kind of interesting. Russia's Putin summarily purged his senior defense and military leaders, replacing them with his buddies in the FSB, what essentially was the former KGB. What does it tell us, the US and the NATO allies, about Russia's intentions?
Well, it says that corruption, to the extent that it's endemic to the Russian government and defense establishment, if it will not attenuate that, it'll certainly shake it up a little bit, because Shoigu, who was the defense minister, was the chief of corruption in the defense ministry, and had appointed a lot of his cronies to positions of authority, controlling everything from weapons production to the conduct of the war in Ukraine. So we can expect that, if nothing else, the corruption will flow in a different direction to the FSB. Let's have no illusions about the FSB. They are also corrupt, but they may be of a little bit different kind. I think what we can expect is that the corridors of power will be filled by different people. Some of them will be perhaps more effective than the previous ones because they were so laden by corruption. Some of them may be the same people with just different uniforms. That's possible too. The FSB is known for its ruthlessness and its ability they're an internal security agency. They're like our FBI on steroids. And when the KGB broke up, at the breakup of the Soviet Union, and the SVR became the overseas intelligence agency for Russia, the FSB became the internal security agency for Russia. However, FSB operates all over the world. And so whether it's SVR or FSB, they overlap somewhat, but they're both very powerful and they have their fingers in so many things. So I think one thing it'll mean, the FSB will be more centralized than the previous corrupt administration. They'll be closer to Putin's head. Putin has always surrounded himself with, he was KGB himself, and since the breakup of the Soviet Union, he has taken over. He tells the SVR that over the external agency what to do, but he's very close to the FSB, and he will be much more in a directive role than he was when he had Shoigu as the defense minister. So I think I don't know whether it won't be less corrupt. I'm sure it'll be corrupt, but I think it might be more responsive to Putin and his authority.
Given your NATO experience, what is preventing the Biden administration from raising active deterrence of Russian forces in the Ukraine with supplies of, for example, long-range missiles before the start of the summer offensive?
We've been pretty clear publicly that we don't want our support for Ukraine to constitute offensive operations in Russia. We saw just this week a chipping away of that. We have said, instead of we don't want the Ukrainian military for attacking Russia in Russia, that we would support the Ukraine military attacking Russian units that were participating in the offensive against Kharkiv. Practically, that's actually significant change, and I think because the change was only just announced, we don't really have a track record to see how effective that is. But I expect that that will continue to develop. The Russian offensive against the area east and north of Kharkiv has been small, but it has the potential to really hurt that area of Ukraine. And I think our willingness to let Ukraine military cross Russian border with really spoiling attacks and deterrence against Russian forces that are participating in that operation will make a difference. I don't know why we're going so slowly. I'm not sure. I mean, if we want to support Ukraine, and I think we should support Ukraine. But I don't know. I think there's a real, again, when we're looking at domestic politics, I think the Biden administration is aware that there's a significant number of their political opponents who don't want to invest more in the war in Ukraine. And so I think they're going to be careful about how they do that, lest it become another election issue that could be attacked.
Well, John, things are afoot there. The Ukrainians are remarkably technologically adept on their own. They have really undertaken massive attacks with simplistic technology against Russian oil refineries, essentially, within a radius of something like 800 miles from the center of conflict on the border. They're almost like the Israelis in many ways. They're pretty adept at this stuff.
They're technologically competent.
They absolutely, and I think it really was the center of technological innovation of the former USSR, and they lost that. The Russians lost that capability. Again, I want to thank you for a wide-ranging discussion, not only on the cusp of the next 7 months of combat activities in Gaza by the IDF, but also some momentous political changes here in the United States. And for that, John, I thank you.
May God bless Israel and God bless the IDF and give them victory over Hamas.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thanks.